Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons. I've got this feeling.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and tonight I'm broadcasting live from the islands of Thailand. This podcast might sound a little different tonight as I don't have all the fancy equipment that I usually have. So hopefully the hotel's Wi-Fi and Thailand's equivalent to the NBN holds up. But we're not here to break down Andy's excellent adventures in Southeast Asia. We're here to dissect our revenge win over the Crows in Adelaide. And joining me tonight to discuss just that is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy in Thailand. Good evening, Bin Man in Australia. Here on Demonland, we really look at the big questions that are important to us. And this week, the big question on Demonland is, will the Luke Jackson contract thread reach the same heights as the Tom Scully thread, which has now been running for 11 years and has 27,000 posts in it?
Is the Tom Scully thread still going? I don't think I've looked at it in 10 years.
But the contract thread's heading the same way at the moment.
I think so. It's going to keep going until we get a signature or an intention of his to leave. But that's something we'll discuss in the coming weeks. Also joining us tonight to update us on the Demons training load program and when we can expect normal programming to resume. Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. Indeed, I'll update on where the program's at. And I've actually, it's funny you should say that because when we talk about the game and my reflection on the game, I just wanted to touch on a little bit of a related point. But yeah, I'll hold my fire.
And it's important for all our listeners to know that Andy is not in Bangkok with Suwaya Little and a bit optimistic.
No, I'm in some southern islands at the moment, and but we also will not be able to take any phone calls. Not that we get them every week, but please, if you are listening, don't call. I don't have any of the fancy equipment that will route the calls in, so you can all hear it. So unfortunately, we can't do that. But let's get straight into the match wrap up. And I'm not sure how many listeners have ever tried to watch a game live whilst overseas before. And I must say that in the past, I've had nothing but problems ranging from time zone issues to dodgy internet. And I did a test on Thursday night trying to use the geo-locked KO app with a VPN, and I had limited success. And for the boomers in our audience, and maybe from the blank stares of my co-hosts from them too, a VPN masks your actual location and tricks servers and apps into thinking you're in Australia or another location. And KO is obviously locked to Australian users, so I needed to use the VPN. And I had limited success with the app being slow to load or the stream was buffering or cutting out, and I knew that wouldn't cut it for me watching the Demons. So I forked out for a week's subscription for the Watch AFL app, which allows expats to watch Aussie rules in their adopted countries. And no, this isn't a commercial for them. Unfortunately, this worked like a charm, and I'll definitely recommend it to any travellers watching these games while sipping a pina colada in some exotic location by the pool. Anyway, there is now a bunch of Thai pool staff and some German backpackers who agree that the umpires have no friggin' idea what they're on about, and more on those maggots a bit later on. The D's started the match where they left off last week, absolutely dominating the contest and kicking truly for the first 3 goals of the match. And my MFC SS unfortunately made the trip with me to Southeast Asia, and I knew that this would not last too long. And almost on cue, not 10 minutes later, we found ourselves down by a goal with a little bit of hindrance from the maggots. And the second quarter was an arm wrestle, and at the main break, the D's were holding on to a slim lead, and no doubt every D's fan was reminded of the heartbreak of our first defeat in 2021. In the third, it was all the Demons, but once again, our Achilles heel is our inaccuracy in front of goal. wayward kicking threat, and to minimise our dominance of the contest, we simply have to address this massive flaw in our game. And no, it hasn't bitten us on the bum just yet, but mark my words, if you fail to take chances like that against, say, a Geelong next week, it will come back to haunt us. And you simply cannot give a team a sniff, and certainly not on their home deck in front of a feral crowd. And we could have put the game beyond the Crows' reach but instead kicked 6 behinds in the third. Yet we allowed the Crows to come within 5 points in the last. In the end, the D's class shone and the cream rose to the top, and we're able to put the Crows away, burying the Demons of last year in the turf of Adelaide Oval. And once again, our mids were simply outstanding. Petracca, Oliver and Viney racked up an incredible 95 disposals between them. And this despite the D's going into the match against the Man Mountain, Riley O'Brien, with no recognised rucks of our own. And Weed and Mitch Brown admirably contested all night, yet O'Brien was able to get his hands on 48 hitouts. But kudos to our midfield bulls, because only 16 of those hitouts were to the advantage of the Crows. And welcome back to Christian Petracca, who racked up 33 possessions, 20 contested, 11 score involvements, 6 inside 50, 6 tackles, 5 clearances and 3 goals. And all this from only contesting 16 of 27 centre bounces. Track spent a mixture of time in the midfield and on half forward. I think it was a 70-30 mix with half forward. And before I go on with the rest of the wrap-up, what did you guys think of Track's role in this match and how good he was using him, B-Man? Do you think we'll do this more, or it was a one-off?
That was funny because my favourite analyst, David King, was talking about it like it was he plays there once and plays more forward time. Ipso facto, look what Melbourne's doing. I think this is what they're going to look to do going towards the future. He said that on the after the coverage, I should say. Yep. He doubled down on the Sunday night, having time to reflect on that on first crack, and doubled down on it, suggesting that that's what how Goodwin was going to play Track for the rest of the season. It's just ridiculous. Like, why on earth would we do that? And Montagna, who bless his cotton socks, sort of tried to disagree a little bit, to suggest, well, in fact, or maybe it was the other co-host, was to suggest, well, they've played something like 70% of centre bounces has been the big three, Viney, Track and Oliver. Why would they change that? Why? What is this thirst for seeing some different thing? That 1 week where he plays a little bit more forward than he has previously, which is not entirely true, because as we talked about 3 weeks ago, he played, was it against Collingwood that he almost played the entire game in the forward line?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, it's just a ridiculous suggestion. Why would you mess with the best midfield in the AFL? I think one of the interesting phenomena this year is how often we have our best three in the midfield. Like, it was 10 years ago, you'd be rotating 4 or 5 of mids was the standard footy practice. Now you keep your best mids in the midfield, and that's what Melbourne does. I mean, he's a great wild card to throw forward, but for someone who can't kick accurately, I want him in the midfield, not up forward. So, yeah, I'm not sure what Kingy's smoking there. Maybe he's over in Thailand with you, just chilling out at the pool zone or something, because I can't, why would they do that? Like, they keep talking about, the commentators at the moment are talking about, well, the obvious thing that's going wrong for Melbourne is our forward line. It sort of flies in the face of the fact we scored 100 points, not quite in this game, but we did the previous week, and, forward line's not a problem. So they're not going to take him out of the midfield.
George, anything you want to add to there?
No, I think it's pretty obvious to people who've been watching Melbourne for quite a while that the only reason Track was up there was because we've got Ben Brown as our only tall at the moment. As simple as that. Who's your next best option? Mitch Brown and Wiedemann were in the ruck roles that they don't normally hold, so it's a bit rough to expect them to rest in the forward line because they wouldn't get any rest. So yeah, we used him occasionally down there, which was advantageous to us. It might be something like what Bin Man just said, a wild card occasionally, but he's not going to be playing a more permanent forward role when we get those sort of players back into their traditional roles in the forward line.
In fact, it was funny, George, because when he said that, it occurred to me that one of the big shifts in Track's game is how fit he's got, because it was always the question that now's been asked of De Goey is when Track, he was always super talented. When he got over his knee that he did and he came back, the knock on him was his fitness. And, he was, say, a 60% forward, 40% shock trooper midfielder. And the question was, would he be able to get to a state where he was maybe the 70-30, 70% midfield, 30 up front? And, everyone was talking about the Dustin Martin comparison. He's now a permanent, he's a midfielder, not a mid forward or a sort of a forward mid. And De Goey's a good example. Like, De Goey should be as fit as Track is. And if he was, same as Stringer, he'd be playing, 70% midfield as well, because that's where you win the game. You don't win the game up forward. You win the game from defence and in the midfield.
Track also had his kicking boots back on this week, kicking 3 goals, and prior to this match he'd booted 9 goals, 21 behind this season, with an incredible 10 failing to score. That it's truly horrendous accuracy, and he's perhaps the biggest culprit of my biggest gripe about this premiership team. Despite almost cracking 100 points, our forward line is still a little bit of a worry, particularly Big Benny Brown being double and triple team. Simply has no foil, and understandably this week without our 2 rucks, we were forced to play our 2 other backup forwards in the ruck, as George mentioned, for most of the game. And in the end, George, I think you pointed out that 7 of our 14 goals came from our midfield. And let's move on to the back line. Despite some early angst due to some very soft freaks to Taylor Walker, and more on the Maggots later, defence held up very well. It was an intercept fest from our backs, with Lever, May, Brayshaw and Hibberd and Petty racking up 49 intercepts between them, which is absolutely elite from our back line. And I think the team in total had 73 or something intercepts, which they were going on the broadcast that it was some type of record. Haven't been able to verify that, but pretty impressive. Guys, any other general comments about the match before we go into tactics? Big man?
Just as a general, I really, really, really enjoyed this match, and I just thought it was a terrific win for a number of reasons, not least that George's point about the fact that we didn't have a recognised ruckman. For a team that's so system-based and so predictable week in, week out, they had to look at a different way of setting up in the middle, and Goody talked about it in the presser and sharking the opposition defender. They had something like, 40-odd more hit-outs than us. So fantastic performance to go a full match without, I thought we did all right. Did his job. I thought Brown did all right, did his job. Neither of them took a mark practically around the ground. So it wasn't just their ruck work that we dropped. It was that down the line kicking that neither of them really could, help us out so much. But they both did a pretty good job of making sure the ball came to ground when
I thought they did
needed. So,
I thought they did a good job of that. Yep.
Yeah. So, but I really enjoyed the game, and I know I've talked about loading, and I think that it's for me. There's a thread on Demon Land that talks about loading, and a poster Dub D made a comment in there, and I really understand where he's coming from. That he gets frustrated. He doesn't want to hear about that sort of stuff. He just wants to watch the footy, and that joke that Demetrio said a few years ago that this is not a game played by we shouldn't let the game be controlled by phys edits. Remember that comment 20 odd years ago, and I really get where Dub D's coming from. But what I'd say is that for me at least, obviously it's a theory that I've got, but I think it's based on pretty sound evidence, and the way I look at things is the balance of probabilities, and it's by there's for me that it's pretty overwhelming evidence that that's what we've been doing, and that's what we did on the weekend. I predicted it last week that that we'd come out, we'd be not as sharp as we were against the Lions and freshen up against Brisbane. But for me, one of the things that it's important about it is that when I first started following footy in seriously in the 70s, there might be maybe one or two players in the AFL who ran more than 15 kilometres a game, I reckon. Maybe we fast forward to the 90s, maybe you got 3-4 players who are running that sort of distance. Greg Williams ran along, those sorts of players. You go to the 2000s, maybe you're looking at 7 or 8, players who are running 10, 15 kilometres a game. Now you're looking at, in 2022, you're looking at probably 16 of your 23 of your 22 starting players are running north of 10 kilometres, half of them 15 kilometres plus. They're incredible athletes. So that aspect of the game, I just think...
With less game time and less time on the ground as well because of more rotations.
So the game is like I just think they're incredible athletes, and so I really celebrate how athletically brilliant they are. But it also helps me understand what's happening. So I've just watched a couple of the footy shows before, and the conversation on the couch was, well, how could St Kilda go from a team that kicks 2 goals in a game of footy, and then the next week beats Carlton? Well, it's obvious why. I mean, what do you want? And so if you're a Saints fan, what do you think? This is remarkable. The same question came up on 360 just before I came on. How do they go from, Robbo was talking about don't sign Ratton on the back of a 2-goal win, next week sign him. How do they go? How else do you explain it? So if you don't explain it that way, the problem is for a lot of fans, well, you go to the suggestion that St Kilda are mentally weak. That's why they were poor. They're not switched on. They're not doing what they need to do. And again, if we hear what Goodwin said during those 3 weeks, he praised the players every week for their effort and intensity. So he wasn't disappointed at all in terms of what we put in. We were just not able to. And so, from that context, I really enjoyed that game because this is exactly the sort of win that is a really important one. And when we look back at the 3 losses, you mentioned that inaccuracy didn't cost us. It definitely cost us. Probably win that game, the Swans game, if we kick accurately. We also, as we talked about, we had issues in all 3 of those losses where we lost players during the game. In this game, we didn't lose any players, and I was super impressed with the senior players, and I'll talk a bit later. That's my positive. But the senior players, and when you look at the sort of the chart that I referenced last week of the loading period, goes for about 10 weeks, or 8-9 weeks, is that there's a V, like a crossover X shape of volume and intensity. And the same thing happened last year. Is the power players like Petracca who lose their zip. He could barely run past the pack. Suddenly he's rediscovered it. Like, that's not a mental thing. It's purely a physical thing. So for me, it helps me understand the game. And what was really interesting, George, I read your report of the game, and the best players were all senior players, like all of our more senior players, compared to the previous week where Cozzy played with a real zip against the Lions. Sparrow played really well. Our younger players, Jackson, were up and about. This week, our younger players look slow and a bit fatigued, and not one of, there were 6 players you mentioned, George, in the best. They're all 25 plus. They're all 200. They're all 100 plus game. Petracca and Oliver and I think Harms was in your list. And that's because, one, they're not as impacted by the heavy loads that the young players are going to be. But 2, those players are all power players. So the power players are starting to freshen up. So for me, it really helps understand the game. It helps explain things. So another example just tonight was on 360 on the couch, is they were talking about Fremantle. And they said from round 1 to round 9, they were number 1 in the AFL for defensive pressure. Now they're 17th in the last 6 weeks. Why? What is that? What they're asking on the couch? Well, if you apply the logic of loading, it's obvious that data tells me that they're fatigued. They'll get back to where they need to be. They've had a pretty lousy last few weeks, but they've won. So good on Freo. Like they beat Hawks, for instance. But those numbers, reflect what they're doing on the training. So again, for me,
why aren't these experts, and surely Gary Lyon and those guys know about loading? Why aren't they bringing that into the conversation? Is there a reason why they wouldn't?
Again, I apply Occam's razor to this. It's exactly the same reason why I think loading is the cause of many of the fatigue-related issues and the performance. And it's not just us. It's of the top 5 teams, it's only Geelong who have not lost games in this last 6 weeks. But they've played no one above Richmond. I mean, they've played no one of note. They haven't played any top 4 teams, whereas Freo have played 3 top 4 teams. We've played 3 top 4 teams, and so's Lions. So we've all got an equally poor record in the last 6 weeks. We've lost basically 50-50 for the top 4 teams in the last 6 weeks, which jags exactly with what the last few years have been, that discussion about Richmond's premiership years. So as to applying Occam razors to that question, Andy, it seems to me it's fairly obvious. It's in no one's interest in the media to have games where a team's going to be poor. It's in no interest to the media. Pump up a game like Melbourne, Brisbane. It's a top of the table clash. Channel 7 and paid $1 billion or whatever it is for the rights. They don't want to have a discussion about the fact that St Kilda's only going to kick 2 goals or Brisbane, might be off for the night. They want blockbusters and blockbusters only, And so I think the answer is that it's basically an unwritten rule. You don't speak about it. One, I think there's a culture of you don't make excuses. But 2, it's a media thing. Why would you want, it's not helpful for selling newspapers or clicks or people tuning in if you know that, geez, St Kilda are only going to kick 2 goals because I know they're exhausted this week. Why they don't, it's because it's dominated by ex-footballers. It's all wrapped up in the ratings, and there's a lack of proper analysis of the game. That's my theory, at least. George?
Well, before George goes on, I might need your services, bin man, when if Geelong happen to end up on top of us at the end of the season. I might need your help in putting forward my case to my nephews, who I have a bet every year of who finishes higher. And I think I've got a case that they had easy teams to play during their loading period, and we unfortunately were screwed with who we got to play. So yes, look for that call, George.
Yeah, I think you might have summed it up inadvertently there, Ben Man, is that the commentators we see today, the Gary Lyons and the Nick Rewaltz and the David Kings, and those guys never experienced loading.
Not to the extent, not to the degree.
You forget how long these guys have been out of the game.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And what we've seen with Richmond in the last couple of years in their premiership years, and I think a lot of teams would have looked at Melbourne last year in the premiership year and gone, wow, look at the difference that they've achieved at year end compared to during the season. What are they doing to get that 1% that we're not getting? And we've heard it from Chris Scott.
He said as much, didn't he?
He came out and said it. Yeah, we have to be loading to replicate what they're doing. And as soon as one team does it, the other teams will pick up on it. Except that we've also noted there are teams who are struggling to get into the 8 who can't afford to load because they have to get that next win.
Like Collingwood, who now won 6 in a row. Exactly.
Yep.
So, people talking about them being a top 4 contender, but I'll bet my bottom dollar if they get up, if they got to top 4, they'll get smashed week 1 because, they can't afford to be peaking then. They need to be peaking now to finish top 8. I mean, they've won their 6 in a row, but, the bottom end of the back end of the season when we play them next time, you watch the difference in that game from when we play them in round 21 or something, or round 20, compared to the Queen's birthday. They won't know what hit them. So as good as that they're going now, they won't know what hit them. And exactly as you say, George, I mean, basically Scott said it, is look what Melbourne did last final series. We've got no chance against that unless we change something, because is the bottom line. I mean, loading's been happening for a long time. But not to the extent that it is now. But again, I'd also add that there's been a shift in the footy, the tactics, because Melbourne is a team that's completely based on those, 16, 17, 18 players running 15 kilometres a game, which there was no equivalent 10 years ago of that. You only needed to, but now our whole system collapse. It does not work unless everyone's doing that defensive all team spread. You take that out of the game and we're suddenly a pretty average, an average footballer, depending on our stars, which is, again, one of the reasons I love that game so much. I really, really enjoyed this win. It was, it's easy to forget 29 points. I thought, we took our chances. Track looked thrilled when he kicked that goal off his set shot. He looks like he simplified his play. I thought Viney was incredible. I thought just Viney was awesome. Oliver was awesome as well. So, yeah, I just thought it was a wonderful win. And for me, that context is, I find it helps me enjoy the game more, because it helps me understand, at least gives me some logic as to why Melbourne have performed this way, or the Saints have performed that way, or how could Freo be 40 points up and suddenly stop like they've been shot against Port, So I think it's, will it come into footy? Of course it will. And that's what I reckon players are being more honest about stuff. And keep in mind, it was Selwood who brought this into the conversation by directly after the game saying it, admitting it. I reckon Scott was, he sort of opened up the dialogue even more. He could have shut that question down if he wanted to. But, yeah, hopefully there'll be a shift with it.
All right, let's move. George, you got something else?
I was just going to ask, Bin Man, has that improved your betting?
I've made a mozza. No, it has, honestly. Like, for instance, I backed the Saints on the weekend on that logic that they're freshened up. So absolutely had a very successful last few weeks.
And Andy will be after sponsorship from one of the agencies as a result of this.
I think so. Got to pay for this holiday. Okay, in this week's Tactics Talk, Big Man is going to tie some of the tactical threads that we've discussed throughout the year together, and we're going to play a clip from Crows coach Matty Nix post-match, in his post-match presser, and also a clip from Jake Lever's post-match interview with Benny Gibson. So we'll get right into that.
Yeah, we played an extra up, as did they. They played a couple of players up the ground high, so they were happy to give us an extra behind the ball as well. And in the end,
sorry, Big Man, did you want to say something before that?
Oh, sorry, it was just the context for the clips is sort of almost following on from what I was saying in terms of our systems and our defensive thing. And over the season, George has talked about our defensive structure. We've talked about being a defence-first football team, that our offence comes from our defence. I mentioned in one of the Tactic Talk session slots that we how well we control the tempo, and controlling the tempo is a critical part of the way we play footy. Talked about the all-team defensive running, and specifically last week, and Gorge Dunyan asked in the chat room, why don't we match a team at the bring an extra to the stoppage when they do? And the answer was that because it allows us to play an extra behind the ball, which is such a critical part of our the way we go about our footy. And you mentioned we had 30 intercept possessions this week, which is just really our game plan in a nutshell, is that we force the ball carrier, the kicker, under pressure to dump kick. We split or halve the clearances despite being down. Although interestingly, in this game, as we'll hear in a second, they didn't bring an extra to the stoppage, Crows. So you can't really see that on the telly so well. So just these two clips pick up those threads that we've talked about during the season. So Matty Nix after in the post-match presser, and then, as you said, Lever interviewed after the game by Burjo.
It's not Burjo. It's Ben Gibson.
Burgo. Matty Gibson's, yeah.
Ben Gibson.
Matt Gibson,
Matt
whatever.
Bergen.
Yeah, Matt Bergen. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we played an extra up, as did they.
Oops.
They played...
All right, here we go.
Yeah, we played an extra up, as did they. They played a couple of players up the ground high, so they were happy to give us an extra behind the ball as well. And in the end, it played out. They were better behind the ball than we were tonight.
In that game last year, they kicked 15 goals. Was it a real focus, I guess, to keep the scoring down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you go back to last year, our first 9 weeks, we really prided ourselves on defence. And in that round 10 game, I thought that we sort of got fuelled by offence. So we knew coming over here, Adelaide are very similar. They want to play fast footy, and when they do, they're a bloody hard side to play against. So we knew that we had to really slow them down. And for us to be able to do that, I thought it was a credit to a lot of the forwards and the mids to be able to put on the pressure, and then the backs winning contest behind the ball.
The backs have been pivotal for most of the year to keep them to 10-5. Is that a result you're happy with?
Absolutely. I think that when you keep a team that are a really high offensive team to 10 goals, 15 scoring shots, I think they had, it was a really good defensive performance. There were some things maybe in the first half that we would have liked to clean up, but definitely in the second half I thought it looked a lot better.
Yeah. So as I said, it's sort of really that's the key. And he talked earlier in that clip about what he calls the Melbourne way, which I'd not quite heard, but he mentioned it a few times. The Demons way, I think he said. And what he just discussed then is the Demons way in a nutshell. You know, that it's about stopping the opposition scoring first, not just being offensive for scoring's sake. Controlling the tempo, as I said, all team pressure, all of those key things, and it's why a team like the Dogs, I think, in this modern footy, they're going to struggle because they're offense first. It's all about offense. And you take that away from them, as happened against the Lions. They were up and about in the first 20 minutes of that game. As soon as that stopped, their game felt like it just collapsed in the game against the Lions, the Dogs. Melbourne's the opposite, so it's almost as if when a team starts getting offensive and moving the ball quick, that's when, if we, don't look to control the tempo and bring it back to the Melbourne way, that's what Lever was touching on, is that we allowed them to control the tempo in that game last year. And, remember, it was a really high scoring game. I think both teams maybe scored over 100 points in this same game last year. So, the Melbourne way, the Demons way, I like Lever's phrase there.
Have you never heard the Melbourne way?
I've heard the Melbourne way, but he's like, or the Melbourne method, or the, maybe
I've heard it since 2018. Goody used to always say it. I've heard some of the players mention the Melbourne way. They didn't ever really go into what the Melbourne way was, but it was the brand of football that they want to play.
This is the way.
This is the way. Grogu. No, what's his name? The Mandalorian. Let's get into our positives. My positive for this week was Ed Langdon. It was really nice to see the return to 2021 and early 2022 form of Ed Langdon. We haven't seen these big numbers from him since his rib injury. Prior to this match, he'd racked up 30-plus possessions on 3 occasions this season, the last time being the 39 possessions in the Saints game. But since his return from injury, he's had 23, 10 and 15, so his 33 possessions this week hopefully heralds the return of Langdon and the link-up and run and carry that he provides us, which was a signature of our premiership season. So I just really loved Ed Langdon's game, kicked a beautiful, beautiful goal as well. Let's see more of that. Boys, anything to add on Ed Langdon's score?
Other than he's a star.
Yeah.
Looks good. He's like, I don't know where he'd rank in my top of all time recruits, but he'd be up there.
He just runs and runs and runs and runs.
Well, as we've talked about, we've got 3 in this team that are probably in my top 10, Lever, May and Langers.
I was impressed when Ben Gibson interviewed him after the game, and he commented about his goal, thinking it was lucky or something. And Ed got a bit miffed. He said, "No, I practice that all the time," and I think he does.
Yeah, I saw that interview. He was pretty phlegmatic in it, wasn't he? Yeah. He's a very droll character.
Yeah.
George, you wanted to talk about the return of the injured.
Yeah. I think it's very easy to forget where we were even in the last month and before that, where particularly down the back line, we were really struggling to have a single tall in there. We've seen Lever come back now. His kicks in this game were again as the top statistics for him for the season of 9.4. He's only played 11 games this season. Stephen May, after his little interlude away, again, intercept marks against the Crows was the best for the season. 5.3 for the game, which incidentally is the same as where he was last year. Christian Salem in only his 5th game for the season, but again, equalled his season's best in kicks and tackles in the Crows game. Ed Langdon, Andy's just talked about. It's too easy to forget a rib injury, how painful they are, and they just take time to repair themselves. It's now the 5th week, which is sort of traditionally 4 to 5 weeks is for rib injuries is how long they take to repair. So he's now come back to his best. It's easy to forget that Petracca a couple of weeks ago had obviously some sort of knee concerns, and all of a sudden they're not there anymore. Michael Hibberd, I think it's his third game back. You put all these players together, and I think it was last week was the first not the previous week was the first time that we've had the Lever May Petty team back together, and I forgot about Petty and all of that. He was out for a while as well. First time we're getting the old crew back together, and I think the numbers that we see as a result of the intercepts, particularly in this game, were that we're getting exactly all our prime movers back in that defensive area. If we could only do the same in the forward line, it'd be fantastic. But it really does put a different complexion on the game when you've got those skills back. And this week, hopefully, we'll get the return of Max and Jackson as well, so that'll improve things even further.
Salem he was near back his best on the weekend, wasn't he?
Yeah,
and
he's got depth in his kicking once again.
Yeah, and even for a huge Salem fan like myself, for us is that he's easy to underrate. His impact is hard to. It's different the way track plays, for instance, or even Hibbo. Someone like Hibbo who's running hard off the half-back flank. He just seems so sort of unassuming, but he looked, as you said, he was getting good penetration on his kicks, and those little sort of not even one step, just those stab kicks that he drills, short and sharp, and he seemed to be in the right spots. And what I really like about it is that, I think as I touched on last week, is if he's playing that role, it frees up Bowie to be a different type of player than he has been in that first part of the season when Salo was out, and even in these first week or so back. I thought he was terrific. And the other one that's interesting, George, back there, thinking of this, being our best back seven, so to speak, is Gus is in it this year. It's really, I know we've talked about it, but he was brilliant again. And in terms of intercept marks, I'm pretty sure I heard on the coverage that he's number one in the AFL for intercept marks. So I might have a look in a sec, but if he's not, he'll be right up there.
I think he's even quite up there on marks, if not leading.
Yeah, he was
marks.
Second most marks last week. He took plenty again on the weekend, but he's our leading intercept. I know for sure he's our leading intercept marker.
He has the most marks. He's at 129, Sicily 126, and then I'm assuming he'll also be the intercept mark leader as well.
So it's that suddenly makes it really impressive, and he's making good decisions as well. And it's funny you forgot Petty, because when you bring that third tall in, suddenly it becomes a real. Back in the day, it was like if you lose a forward, they always say you bring another tall forward in. It's one less. That's one less sort of big defender that can go to your best player. It's a bit like the opposite down back is, three talls of that quality makes it pretty hard to snag a mark down forward. That's for sure.
He actually isn't leading the intercept marks. Paddy McCartan on 50, Charlie Ballard 49, and Brayshaw 45. Right. But he is leading marks. B-Man, you want to talk about, you touched on it earlier, our senior players? You want to go?
Yeah, it was like an old school win. That's one of the reasons I really enjoyed it, is that, again, back in the day in the sort of 2000s and late 90s, the best teams just kept, they'd win. And often it was on the back of just how sheerly talented, how much sheer talent they had at their disposal. The Hawks, I used to hate watching the Hawks because, it didn't matter who they played. Their talent just got them over the line. And that's what it felt like on the weekend. Just our most talented players just stood up and made an impact. So Viney, Oliver, Track, obviously, but Gus as well. You mentioned May George. I thought Lever again. His leadership was fantastic on field. We scored we got an easy goal given against us early on, and he was back there trying to calm the troops. And I just think it was just a fantastic performance from our senior players, particularly in the absence of the skipper. So not having Max Gawn there, having the unusual situation of having no recognised ruckman, or at least for us. I just think the senior players were fantastic, and I'd probably put Hibbo in that. He probably didn't do a massive amount, but his leadership was strong as well. But just it was just awesome to see our stars stand up, and without Track, we probably don't win that game. maybe it's hard to tell. Langers is the other one as was picked up on. So just terrific. We've lauded our younger players plenty, but sometimes those senior players just need the recognition they deserved. And awesome to hear Clary's been signed up for 7 years. I mean,
I didn't have that down as a discussion point, but we may as well just discuss it now. We had to sort of lock him away.
Barely got any news. Dropped like a stone into the pool of bloody nonsense out there in media land.
I mean, are there any devil's advocates? Is there any concerns over a 7-year contract, or are you happy to lock him away for good, for life?
Well, it's actually an 8-year contract because he's got another year to run, and so it's an extension on that. So, well, it's a 7-year contract, but he's got another 8 years. That takes him to 33, 34. I couldn't be more thrilled. Yeah. Why would you not? I mean, Track and Oliver have now played 96 games together. The last 96 games together, 4 more, and they've played a ton together. Oliver's proven his durability. I mean, shy of getting knocked out or whatever. He's exactly the sort of player you want to lock away for as long as possible, I would have thought.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to bring up, we were just talking about Hibberd before. I'll put my hand up and say that I had almost written him off. I thought with the calf injuries he had early that he'd never be able to find that form that he had found last year. And he's proven me wrong, and I couldn't be happier more about that.
Yeah, it's really returned to his best now. And it's just that solid. It's almost like the break glass. We've got one player left to stop this forward attack. It always seems to be Hibberd or Gus in recent times, but Hibberd's been fantastic, especially when he's able to shut down different types of players, like the Charlie Cameron job that he did last week. That was just fantastic. So great to see him back.
Will he play this week on Stengel, do you think?
I think there's a very, very good chance.
Yeah.
How do you see either of you the role that Bowie plays with now Salem back? Like, his one-on-one's not really his go, is it? But he's like, surely he's the sort of go-to for a smaller player when you've got two. Like Hibberd can take a Stengel, for instance. But yeah, what sort of defender do you feel like he is,
George?
I really don't know. He seems to be one of those guys who just reads the play so well.
Yeah, zones off, doesn't he?
When you've got 3 talls in there, he's the one at the back who seems to pick up the crumbs. It's going to make it next to impossible for people like Hunt and Rivers to get back into the side short of an injury the way he plays, because that's sort of their role as well, bringing the ball out of the back line. He's just a natural footballer. He's fantastic to have down there. I don't think he's a lockdown type player.
No, that's the thing. He's not. Yeah. And I agree. I think that's sort of that, almost like the Caleb Daniels, get the ball out the back of the contest and use his kicking skills, as opposed to Salem plays a higher half back role, doesn't he? But he also doesn't lock down really anyone. So it makes Hibberd's role even more important, that ability to go one-on-one with those sort of medium-sized forwards.
I was just thinking Rivers and Hunt. I feel for them because with Hibbo back in form, Salem back in the team, and Brayshaw sort of embracing that defensive role and making it his own. It's great for our depth because any injuries and they can slot in. But I do feel for those two guys, but good depth to have. Let's get on to our improvements, and for mine this week, interstate umpires. I'll preface this by conceding that you probably haven't heard me have a whinge this year about the umpires, as I believe we're in the positive on the free kick differential. We were plus 22 before this week. We took a big hit and are now only plus 8. I thought the umpiring was absolutely abysmal on Saturday afternoon. It was laughably one-sided, and I don't think there was much crowd affirmation behind most of the free kicks either. Some of the free kicks awarded to Taylor Walker were just mind-boggling, and never in my wildest dreams could I wish for the protection that he received as a forward. And if our forwards ever got an armchair ride like the one he received, I would have welts all over my body from pinching myself awake. The worst free kick of the lot was the blocking free kick in front of goal that he received for jumping into a stationary Mitch Brown and kneeing Mitch in the head. Staggering. I cannot understand that. The free kick count was 23-9, which is even more astonishing when you factor in that at least 4 or 5 of our 9 free kicks were from the Crows kicking the ball out on the full. We were probably actually only awarded four free kicks for the day, and don't even get me started on the ones that were blatantly weren't paid. Clary had his head taken off. May was held and slung, tackled without the ball, to name a few. And perhaps it's time for neutral umpires at hostile interstate venues, and maybe not just interstate venues, but ones that are in Geelong too. And that's my rant over.
Appalling. Like if we'd lost that game,
Yeah.
like I was pretty sanguine about it, but at one point I suddenly thought, what's the free kick count? Because they hadn't said it on the telecast at all. They barely mentioned it.
They don't. And they weren't even mentioning that there was any lopsidedness, maybe that's my one-eyed, but I don't know.
So I jumped on the AFL app and I couldn't immediately find the number either, and I didn't want to not watch the match and read the app. But I was thinking, we can't have got a free kick. We got 3 free kicks after quarter time. Is that right? We had 3 in the first quarter.
Yeah,
unbelievable.
And there were a lot, as I said, on the full. They had 4 or 5 on the fulls.
To be honest, as we've talked about, it's not really the free kick. It's
no,
the ones
that doesn't
paid are the ones that are really frustrating, like the ones that are. But just on the and thanks to a mate of mine, the Gorilla, for these numbers. But the Crows have lost at 7 home games this season. They've lost 3 of those games, so you reckon that would even up the count a little bit. They're plus 73 free kicks.
At home.
Excluding their game against Port. So 7 home games excluding Port, so 8 in total. 7, they're plus 73. They had 32-15 versus Freo, 33 free kicks to 13 versus Tigers. They won 31 free kicks to 20 versus the Saints, and 23-9. How's that? 73 plus 7, so over 10 per game if you take out the Port game, which is obviously they're both home teams, so that confuse the umpires to all get out for that one. Plus over 10 more than the opposition each game. I mean, come on, that can't be that's statistically completely anomalous, isn't it?
That's why I'm calling for neutral umpires at hostile interstate venues.
Just make them professional, for God's sake.
That's exactly it, man. Just make them professionals. It's like the international cricket umpiring. The problems that they used to have that with the biases that seemed to be endemic in that. As soon as they introduced an independent cricketing board, all of a sudden those problems seem to disappear.
And you pay them, you train them. You'd have a rule of course you don't do it at home.
Yeah, it's it's a multi-million-dollar business. Why have you got part-timers still umpiring these games? It's ridiculous.
And I mean, it's the biggest bugbear of all fans is the inconsistency. But it was a shocking, because it didn't feel like we were, even when they got within 5 points, it didn't feel like we'd lost control of that game. It didn't feel like the sort of, I felt during the Collingwood game. I felt we were going to lose that game at three-quarter time against the Pies, and it never felt like that. However, there were some pretty critical frees that they got and then we didn't, that were they could have easily influenced the result of that game. And as you say, George, a multi-billion-dollar industry, and you can have it decided by just complete howlers. It's just not good enough, really.
George, your improvement is still the forward line. That was actually mine as well, but I thought I'll take the umpires on. You know my feelings on this.
We've talked about that in the last couple of weeks, and the reality is, we've got one tall forward at the moment in Ben Brown, and it's not surprising. You mentioned it before, Andy. There's no foil for him in the absence of T-Mac. He's expected to mark quite often against 2 and 3 opponents, and people on Demon Land are complaining about his lack of marking. It's not going to happen while he's got 2 people hanging off him consistently. It's so easy for the opposition to double up on him. We're also missing his marking up the ground. Another role that T-Mac used to be able to perform, but also you'd alternate occasionally, and Ben Brown would be up there on the wing. He just can't get up there at the moment. He's being run all around the place, doubled up. There's not much to do. At least we had Mitch Brown kick 2 in the game, but the mids kicked 7 of the goals that we had. The trouble was we had 3 really, really bad misses, both from Bedford, Ben Brown and Harms all missed goals from basically inside the goal square with snaps. Now, if those had gone through, the game was over. It was well and truly over.
Bedford's was perplexing, wasn't it?
Just awful. Yeah, Ben Brown's wasn't much better. A snap around the body from the top of the goal square. But yeah, I also noticed Ben was limping in the second quarter, so it was very difficult for him to obviously get any sort of spring or even, any sort of run around the ground. We only managed 6 goals from mark and set shots. Most of our stuff is coming from in play. Of those marks and set shots, half were Mitch Brown got 2 of them, and Fritsch 1, and Ben Brown got 1 as well after the siren. But again, the majority of our shots are coming from the mids further up the ground and in play. So the one positive come negative is that Petracca was involved in 46% of score involvements. It sort of tells you that how important he was in this game, but it also tells you the others aren't doing all that much around apart from him. So there's a lot required from the forwards. I don't know that it's going to get much better. We're trying to create scenarios to cover the losses of T-Mac in particular. While we've got Wiedemann and Mitch Brown rucking, we can't really use them as forwards, so it's going to be difficult to see what we come up with in the coming weeks, as we certainly get at least hopefully 1 or maybe 2 of our rucks coming back.
Petracca's actually leading the league in score involvements. Another feather in his cap.
And did last year, I think.
Yes.
I mean, that's his go-to. A couple of interesting points there, George. One of which is that it goes to the way Goody coaches and the philosophy, and again goes back to the Melbourne way or the Demons way or whatever we want to call it, is that he does not change things. And so lots of coaches over the years, in the scenario where our forwards clunking the ball, as everyone's pointing out, and it seems to be the sort of flavour of the month to pick that weakness for the Ds, would modify it somehow, would play short, would direct their players to lead up, or would make some change to at least offset the impact of not having a T-Mac or a third tall, or not Goody. Just keeps on going with the same game plan, even though Mitch Brown isn't going to be dragging the ball down in the same way that Luke Jackson or Maxi Gawn is. You still kick to that thingo, because it's all about predictability. You don't change it for a week just to suddenly get a little bit of a spike in performance with that week, because that might impact that choice the player has. It all has to be automatic for Goody. So you don't change anything. That you tweak, but you don't change the fundamentals. And just that on that point, George, it's critical what you noted about not having T-Mac in, and also now with Weed this week playing up, is that we are always going to bomb it in. So it might be frustrating to watch, but we aren't going to clunk that many. That's just not. But we have our 3-4 talls going for it, 2 or 3 talls, one of which is usually blocking, giving that space. If you take that player out, we're still going to keep kicking to the pack, and we'll get outmarked if we has exactly as has happened in the last 4 weeks. Is that out of nowhere we're aerially getting beaten, but that will change when we get the third tall. So I mean, ultimately, when we go to the forward line, Lazy asks about the sort of what we think about the forward line going forward. We'll go back to the same model, and I expect that Weed will come in and be the third tall, and he's just got to get better at blocking for Benny Brown and doing it, because we're not going to change our method. And so we're going to bring in players who can play their role and stick to the method that we've built. We're simply not going to change horses at this stage.
Big man, is there anything you wanted to add as an improvement?
Yes, my improvements this week, Andy, was we really need to get better at a team at winning free kicks. Like, I don't blame the umpires, unlike you. I think it's a mental weakness our players obviously have. We're not winning frees enough. We're failing in that key performance indicator. We need to
what
put
are
a
you
bit of mayo on it, maybe, or do some better acting.
Are you suggesting we duck and dive and?
Yeah, I'd be getting Waitman down there to give us some tips, and
Well,
Oliver.
Charlie
Oliver's,
Spargo's very good at sort of.
Yeah, he's not bad at it. And we've got
That's the fourth one.
And a big improvement is we've got to be more switched on. We can't be giving away the sort of free kicks that Mitch Brown gave away to Tex Walker by standing there and allowing Tex Walker to jump all over his head. I mean, that was blocking every day of the week.
Can you believe that? They said his eyes. What you mean? The guy's jumping his knee into you. Where are you going to put your eyes?
He didn't move. How could that be blocking? So we've got to. That's my improvement for the week. They've got to.
Like, are you allowed
stop
to
giving away those silly free kicks?
Yeah. All right, let's move on.
And it couldn't have gone to a better fella than Tex Walker
yes.
to get a sort of gimme goal. Like
All right,
that.
isn't he a bit of a flopper as well? He was playing for him. We should learn from him.
My other thing from the commentary on the weekend was I forget exactly who said it. Maybe it was Dunstall, but one of them was saying basically that Tex Walker was giving Steve May a complete bath.
Yes.
I mean, what are you watching the same game of football?
Was that when he gave the handball over his?
Yes.
Over his, okay, so I can't remember who said it. I think it was. I don't know. I can't remember who said it. But then someone else said straight after that. Well, actually, 3 of those possessions he had were from dodgy free kicks, basically.
Yeah. And he barely got a kick in the second half. It was it was David King at half time. You probably were swimming in the pool in Thailand by that point. But David King at half time seriously posed the question, what are we going to do? What are the D's going to do with Walker? Should they move May off him? I was like, no, they're not going to move Steve May off Tex Walker. It's like, come on, man.
He changes his opinion on Melbourne, David King, more than I change my underwear.
More than he changes those pastel shirts. It's like...
All right, let's move on to Casey. Casey remain undefeated, 3 games and percentage clear on top of the ladder. I think they do have a game in hand, though. After a slow start, they eventually put their foot down and mercilessly defeated Port Melbourne by 58 points. Cade Chandler put his hand up to take another crack at senior selection, booting 5 goals from 29 disposals. Dunston, I got Dunston on the mind, had 23 disposals, including 8 clearances, while Oscar Baker had 24 touches. George, who impressed you this week out of Casey?
This was one of the worst games to possibly
I
watch.
did see it.
That was a clash of all clashes, wasn't it?
Yeah, Port was in a red jumper and Melbourne was in an indigenous red and blue jumper with not very much blue.
And Port was indigenous jumper too, I think.
Was it?
Pretty sure. I think so.
But it was almost completely red, and so the poor commentators were in as much, couldn't find their way as much as us. At one stage, they even thought Melcham was out on the ground because they were just calling numbers because they couldn't see who the players were and which side
the worst
they were
clash
on.
I've ever seen.
It was awful. Yeah, so look, it was a really hard-fought game in one sense. Port Melbourne are a traditional football club. They've got lots of very good VFL quality players in their side, and the scores were level. I think even 10 minutes into the third quarter. And it was only after that point that the Casey Demons got on top really got on top in a big way from that point. They were missing a lot of players. We took a full contingent away to Adelaide, including Van Rooyen, Melcham, and Tomlinson. So they were missing players all over the place from the last couple of weeks. They had a lot coming in from secondary sort of competitions, playing in some cases their first games. Chandler was the complete standout in this game. 29 possessions, 5 goals, and he was in everything. He was really stood out as far and beyond better than anybody else.
Does he play in the mid? Does he play in the midfield?
Yeah, he was playing mid,
50-50,
and down forward as well. But he was in everything. He was really solid.
Yeah.
Complete standout for the whole game. The 5 goals that he got was really good value for the work that he was doing.
That's the first time I've thought, George. I watched first half and the half of the third quarter. It's the first time I've thought to myself, he's above VFL standard.
Yep.
Like he's right at it previously, but it was not just that the ball fell his way, because that can happen. It's how he used the ball. And speaking of kicking, he's got a beautiful, beautiful kick. He hit someone on the lead over the top of a player. It was just a magnificent kick. And that was the best I've seen him play at any level. I was super impressed.
Yeah. Luke Dunstan was prolific at getting the ball, but his usual failure is his kicking. That seems to let him down all the time, but he got bucket loads of the ball. Oscar Baker on the wing does the same sort of thing, gets lots of the ball, but the kicking is just not up to the standard that's going to get him to the seniors list. He needs to improve that, but he's been around a long time now. Hunt and Rivers, in a way, had little to do. They had 15 disposals and 19 disposals effectively, but the way Port were entering their forward line was a lot of high kicks to tools. So there was little opportunity for those players to get involved in the way that they normally do at AFL level. So, it's Ellison. I said this a couple of weeks ago. There's no way known he's not going to be on an AFL list next year. So he popped up in the last quarter, I think, for a goal. They were playing him down back, and then they move him up forward, and he kicks goals. He just does everything he needs to. Again, a natural footballer, and he's put on a lot of muscle. So I think he would, if he's put on an AFL list, he will really blossom. My real concern is what I've spoken about before, is people like McVie and Rosman and even Deacon Smith just need to show a lot more than what they are currently.
I thought Rosman played pretty well.
Yes, but he doesn't stand out in the way that he should. He got a lot of credits for getting the ball, which were the wrong player. But
he's only 20.
McVie, I've been very disappointed in very low possession numbers. Again, he needs to do a lot more to get the notice of the senior selectors. But again, there was another win with a lot of AFL players missing out of the side that they've been depending on. They've got the really solid players like Munro and White who hold it together every week and really are probably a level themselves above VFL, but they're not on an AFL list. But it's nice to have still undefeated at this point in the season. They really haven't been challenged all that much, quite frankly. Southport seem to be the only one capable of doing that.
You make an interesting point, George, about Rivers, and I hadn't thought about that in terms of Rivers and Hunt's role. For that halfback flank running off the halfback flank in the rebounding, you're right. It's sort of some of the positions are probably you're not going to lose much going in terms of structure and system going from AFL back to VFL. Like a halfback flank, sort of intercepting defender is always going to be a half, or like a key sort of back interceptor. But that role that both Rivers and Hunt plays, particularly that rebound off halfback with run and dash, probably doesn't translate as well. So it must be a little bit tricky to get that sort of development in, like, you know what I mean? In terms of if you're a ruckman, you're just going to be practice rucking. If you're an in and under midfield, well, it's going to translate either way, like Dunstan, for instance. But yeah, you're right. It's sort of Hunt. I was watching him in that first half. He didn't do anything not great, but it's like the position is also a hard one to stand out in. Like it's a hard one to playing back in that role to think, geez, they're a cut above, so to speak, or he's an AFL player who's just desperate to get back in. And Rivers is an interesting one, isn't it? Given the fact he was a lock in our best 22 last year and now can't get back in.
It's difficult when you haven't got a player like at the VFL level, a player like Lever or May doing intercept work for you, then dishing it off to you to show your wares.
That's a good point, actually. And well, Rosman's sort of playing that role back there. He's playing that sort of taller, not quite like a zoning off as much, but that seems to be the role they've cut out for him. And you're right, though. That's a good point, actually, because they both, Rivers and Hunt, if they're in the seniors, they would be those players on the outside looking for the handball or the kick from the intercept mark.
let's move on to ins and outs, and I guess the big question is, will Max and Luke be back this week? Injury report says that they'll be given tests. If they're both back, do both Sam Wiedemann and Mitch Brown make way for them? Does one of them stay in the team as a second tall? If only one of Max and Luke are back, do they both stay in the team? And if neither Max or Luke are back, how quickly will the sky be falling? Particularly because we're playing Geelong. So who wants to take that, George? What's happening?
You've summed it all up, Andy. It all depends on whether one or two of them is available or not.
Yeah, well, if they're both in, what are we doing with the other? We need a second tall in the forward line, so who stays in? Mitch or
and we
Sam?
go back to the same problem that we had 3 weeks ago, don't we? So it's about their assessment about who's the most capable up there, what they can provide to us, they can provide to the rest of the structures up there. So it's a difficult one. We'll talk about it shortly, but it depends what Geelong might bring to the rucking side as well. There seems to be some rumours that Stanley might not be available this week.
I didn't hear that.
So, no doubt the coaching staff at Melbourne would have had more insights about that sort of scenario should it arise, but I think it might change the way we think if that was the case.
Have either of you heard anything about Jacko's injury? Because there seemed to be very little talk about. I'd heard a PCL potentially, which is sort of a contact injury for ruckman often, isn't it? Is that? But I haven't heard. There was really no information about length of time. Goody wasn't asked about it in the presser, even though they asked about Max Gawn. I thought the obvious next question was Jackson, so you couldn't get a read on that. And then I half expected him to be out for a few weeks because they hadn't said anything, but he's a test. Have you heard any more information, Andy?
I haven't heard anything else. The news hasn't filtered all the way to Thailand yet about that, but what I heard at the time was that it was more
a few drive-bys from Andy tonight, George. I thought you'd be a bit more relaxed being on holidays.
It was more. They took him out. He didn't play because it was more precautionary that they'll rest him rather than risk him. So
right. Okay,
I took from that he'll be back next week, but. Who knows? There's always mystery injuries of the week.
There was a brief session on the Channel 9 news, I think it was tonight, at the Melbourne training. Gawn and Jackson were both there. Jackson was carrying one of those knee-type bandages that has the kneecap exposed, but with strapping above and below, on top of his normal ruckman's type shin guards. So it's difficult to say. Yeah, from what I understand, it was a PCL type injury at training.
Training, not in the match.
Not during the match. Yeah.
Knock on knock.
In
terms of, sorry, Josh.
Yeah. More importantly, there was one quick snippet of him kicking the ball, and he was kicking with the right leg, I think it was, which was the strapped leg. Okay.
Well, let's assume both of them are coming back in. I predict that they'll Weed will stay in and Mitch Brown will go out, and they'll go back to the three talls because we're not we're always going to play the third tall. It's just a matter of who it is. You know, we don't change. That's pretty well established. Mitch Brown isn't physically strong enough. I thought Weed, as I said, did his job. You know, nothing fantastic, but competed pretty hard, and that's all we really need from him is that competing physically, blocking, getting into the contest. I thought he tackled hard, so I really reckon he's going to be the player who's going to be that third tall for the rest of the year. I really hope he takes his chances. But he doesn't have to, he just has to compete hard, physically hard. He's got to move a bit quicker too still. He's still that flat-footed. It's like half, he's actually not very quick, but it's, as I've mentioned a few times, it seems like he takes a half a second for his brain to go. It's, as opposed to Cozzy, who seems like he's like got the opposite affliction. He's moving before his brain's even clicked in. So I think that Bedford might go back to the Medi sub. Tomlinson goes back to Casey is how I see it happening, which needs one more out. Who would be the other out if Maxi comes in, or Mitch Brown out and Bedford out?
There you go. You've heard it first here. All right, let's go into our. George, you want to add anything? No.
No,
All right.
and don't take any notice of anything we've just said, because usually the
Oh,
day
we're always
after this podcast it all changes.
Yeah, I blame COVID for everything.
Well, let's go to our opposition watch, and every year I stick a fork in them and think that they're done, but every year they just come back, and this season they appear to reinvented themselves, and they loom as a very dangerous contender to our own crown. We have a formidable backline, but conversely they have a very formidable forward line. The Cats won't forget us pinching top spot from them after the siren in round 23, nor will they forget the mauling that we inflicted upon them in the preliminary final. And George, you've been keenly watching the Cats this season. What can we expect from them as we travel down the Princess Freeway and enter the Cattery?
I haven't been watching Geelong keenly. I've been watching North Melbourne keenly for the last couple of weeks, because they seem to be the prelude to our next opponent. I'll just prefix this, but North were absolutely awful, absolutely, completely awful. They were witches' hats on the day, which makes it so much more difficult to assess the opposition, because there was no opposition.
Not a great preparation for the Cats, I don't reckon.
No. The Cats had their first goal inside 13 seconds, and then North Melbourne managed only 3 scoring shots post quarter time. It was just appalling. Quite honestly, if Goldstein wasn't in the ruck holding together the middle, that would have turned into a 1-8-6 type game very, very easily. It was just awful. So there was little to take for us from the game. The Cats might have a bit of a problem down back because Stewart's not there. Kolajasny picked up a concussion injury, which will preclude him from playing this week. So basically, their main defenders are Tui and Jack Henry. Can we take advantage of that? Maybe we can if we bring in that second tall down forward this week. Cameron's been in good form. Hawkins is slowly ageing, but he's still damaging, and the real concern is if we don't have a decent ruck, Hawkins takes the rucking role in the forward line. If someone like Wiedemann was trying to ruck against him, there'd be an awful sort of scenario arising. So, hopefully we'll have at least one ruckman back this week. Stengel's dangerous. We talked about him, but again, he had absolutely no pressure. He was doing exactly what he wanted in this game because there were no North players within miles of him, so he ran around a lot.
Yeah, but he's been very good this year. I've seen him a number of times.
He has been, but I'm reminded of Charlie Cameron as well. He was kicking 5 and 6 goals in the game and got nothing when Hibberd was put onto him. Dangerfield was interesting. To me, he's lost a lot of weight in the last couple of weeks from what he was, and he only played 62% game time this week, so they were obviously on restricted times trying to get him up to, obviously for the end of the season, but they're not stretching him very much. Selwood was rested. Again, the same problem. The old bodies are starting to wear out, and they can't afford to use them as much as they used to. Stanley, I've picked up on a couple of threads that he might be a doubtful, but I think it's going to be interesting. In terms of this game, if Geelong win, they are very likely to go top of the ladder. If we win, we'll go 2 games clear of them, but also we'll be 2 games clear of 5th at the very worst as we approach the end of the season. So our opportunities to finish top 4 are almost heavily reliant on this game. We could almost lock it away this weekend by beating them. Just as another aside, you sort of look at North Melbourne, you go, I wonder what Cameron Zurhaar, who's out of contract at the moment, is thinking playing in a side like this, or a Nick Larkey, who's still in contract, but what they're thinking about, how long are they going to stick around at North. Jason Horne-Francis has already put off negotiations, and so Zurhaar. Could Zurhaar be an option for us? And if T-Mac doesn't come up for come the end of the year, because he's only 24 and got a lot of years ahead of him. So it'll be a very, very important game to us and a very interesting game.
The North situation is a shocker. It's if you're my age, the last time there was anything similar was the demise of Fitzroy.
Yep.
Really, that's that bad. And I don't reckon I'm over exaggerating. I've heard the discussion around in Fitzroy's last year, they were 49%. That's what the Roos are now. Like it's a shocker, really. I hate to see it. It's just and it's such a it's not even a rebuild. They're going the opposite direction, aren't they? So what do you do on the Cats? I really like the way they've gone about this year. I think they're a much better chance of winning the flag than they have been in previous years because they've changed their game plan. They've decided to be a territory team. What's interesting with that is that they're playing a different style, which is very much a territory game, which is really the model now. Richmond's model, they started it and we perfected it, and get it forward, trap it in the front half. But defensively, they're better this year than they were last year, which is really interesting. They've had a pretty good draw, I have to say. The last 6 weeks during this period, they've, as I said before, the highest team they've played, and they weren't even that high that time, was Richmond. I think they were 9th or 10th at the time. Now they're in the 8th. So they've had a pretty good run. That 6 in a row, isn't as strong as it looks, but you've got to win. Good on them for winning. I think that they're going to be fitter and stronger at the end of the year. They've said that. So, that game plan tweak, they haven't really built the all-team defence. So really the big change they've made is they're more of a territory team now, much less lateral kicking on the back half and controlling tempo that way. They get it forward, but they haven't got an all-team defence, and they're incredibly reliant defensively on Stewart. His numbers are insane this year, and so are Cameron. So they've got some really quality players. Just one thing I'll say about Cameron is that Cameron's just a magnificent footballer, I reckon. He's a beautiful kick, got good hands. He seems to be super fit this year. So he's getting much higher up the ground than he has, in previous years. And the way they play, they push hard up, and then when they come back, they leave space in behind. And he's so damaging when he's running back towards the goal, and they kick it over his head and he runs onto it. That's where he gets a lot of his goals from, and it works super well, but it won't work that well. It doesn't work as well against Melbourne because unlike most teams, increasingly other teams are employing this strategy. We have our deep goalkeeper. So we have that player, as I talked about, in terms of we have one less at the stoppage, we have our extra down back, and that player is a May or a Petty or a Lever or even a Gus. So when Cameron is running back with the flight of the ball inside 50, in most circumstance, he's running into a big old empty space. Against the D's, he's got May, Lever, Petty or Gus running directly at him. So it really cuts down his efficiency, or his effectiveness, I should say. And the other one is Hawkins, fantastic footballer. You can't let him get one-on-one because he's going to beat almost any defender, probably with the exception of Steve May, for strength in the AFL. But we don't allow many one-on-ones down there. So we get the third man across. We get 4, sometimes 2 or 3 players across. So they're 2 big forward weapons, both fantastic footballers, but our structure, I think, really negates both of their strengths. And so then the question becomes, where do they get the goals? Danger is one. I think he definitely slimmed down, George. It's a good pickup, and I would expect that's conscious to get him through and to be a bit more agile, starting to be a bit of a block of concrete. And Stengel's the other one who's been just a revelation, really, for them. A great pickup. And I'm pretty positive when Scott was talking about would they look at De Goey, he was saying you've got to give people an opportunity and you've got to back your culture. And I suspect they might have been talking about Stengel because he had a pretty rough end to his career at the Crows.
Fancy playing first versus second on a Thursday night at Geelong in front of in a stadium that's not even complete.
I'm going to, Andy.
You managed to get a ticket for it?
I did manage to get the ticket. It was easy. I just went to Ticketek and there we go. You get a single ticket, not a problem.
Hopefully you're sitting amongst the Melbourne supporters.
No. In fact, I know I'm not because randomly, for some reason, I've got a Geelong Ticketek tag. So I'm in the middle of a Geelong area.
Well, hopefully you give it to them.
Yeah, I will be. I'm going to go in a sort of incognito, and about 10 minutes in, I'll take off my jumper and reveal the demon colours.
All right. Well, that's the match. Well, we do have time. George, you want to talk about AFLW?
Yeah, just briefly, this was on the end of draft week in the AFLW. 4 new sides in the competition, which has spread the talent quite thinly. And those 4 sides all had priority picks, and also that was on top of the state league situation that the AFLW has. So the 12 sides in Victoria get to pick from Victorian sides, and the 2 sides in South Australia get to pick from South Australia before anybody else gets a crack at them. I said last year that we're pushing for the pointy end of the season. We're looking seriously at premierships, and it was reflected this year in our selections in the draft. We've maintained most of the players on the list, which was good. But more importantly, our drafted players, with one exception, are all well-established players. The problem for the girls this year is that the girls who are 17 or thereabouts, who are drafted this year for the various sides, probably won't play because it's year 12 for them in their school. So if you're looking to do something this year, you need established players. You're not going to improve your side by drafting players, as has been in the past. So we picked up Maeve Chaplin, who's a 19-year-old with pick 44. She's played with the Casey Demons, so we know what she's like as a defender. And with Gabby Colvin going down, unfortunately, we're going to need all the defenders that we can get together this year. Pick 49 was Samantha Johnson, also a Casey VFLW player and was captain. She's 29 years of age and also is a defender, but also plays midfield as well. So a nice tall midfielder, 180 centimetres tall, which is tall for the girls. The one that we did pick up at pick 72 was Georgia Gall, who's 17 years of age, so she probably won't play, but once again, a 180 centimetre defender. Coincidentally, she's a fast bowler in the under-18s Australian side, I think, so she'll be good in the off-season for cricket practice. Subsequent to the draft, we picked up an uncontracted player from Fremantle in Sabrina Duffy, who's a 22-year-old small forward. She's kicked 30 goals in the last 25 games. She'll be a real positive to the side because our problem has been in the last couple of years actually putting something through the big sticks. We've had Daisy Pearce playing up there, but this will probably be her last season, and we need someone else to help out Taylor Harris up front. Duffy seems to be the ideal person to slot into that role as well. We just haven't been able to put scores on the board in a lot of games during the season, and this might be a real positive for us come the end of the season, come the pointy end of the season. So, yeah, once again, we are seriously pushing for the premiership sort of window. The draw came out yesterday or today, and not surprisingly, because we played in the grand final this last season. We've got a pretty awful draw against a lot of other top sides and existing sides. Adelaide got a similar sort of draw to us, so we can't complain about that. But we're going to finish up, I suspect, in the situation where we're going to have one of the new teams that are coming in are going to get an easy draw and finish up in the finals because it's only a 10-game season. So it'll be disappointing if we were to miss out as we did a number of years ago when exactly that happened. So we'll wait and see. But if you're going to be good enough to win a premiership, you've got to win those games that are put in front of you, regardless.
B-Man, anything you want to add to that?
10-game season's too short, isn't it? So the plan, am I right to say, George, that the plan is from now on the season's going to be starting every year in August?
I guess they'll see how this year goes.
Yeah,
I think that's the thing. I mean,
yeah.
it's going to be interesting because then presumably in that the 10 weeks, does that pick up when's the grand final for the women?
I'd have to look.
It goes through past the thing.
Goes through to December. I
Yeah,
think.
yeah. So,
But
I mean,
in the early part of the season, there's some strange anomalies because the men's competition is still going on. So, for example, we're playing a home game at Port Melbourne.
The women are great. I'll be able to go.
Yeah, because
I was going to say.
obviously, I'm guessing that Casey's playing there on that weekend, on that day, or something like that.
Yeah,
Casey
right.
men. So,
And what are they going to do during the men's finals? Are they playing through that?
I on the dates they do,
Yeah.
but I really haven't looked at it from that perspective.
That'll be
It might be interesting. Might be an opportunity to play a game before.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. Yeah, why not?
On prelim weekend, there's only the 2 games, and then there's the bye before the grand final. So, plenty of opportunities. It's just that I think, George, we need to score more. And what was the other? Sorry, I missed it. There's the Freo player, the small forward that we picked up from
Sabrina
Freo.
Duffy. Yeah.
Is it? No. There was another Italian sounding name. Is that maybe
Just off the top of my head, we picked up another one from Geelong, pre-draft.
I was thinking, okay, maybe I got it wrong, but yeah, we need to do something about our scoring, don't we? We got and Taylor Harris it's a bit like having a tools, but we've got to get better at accuracy as well. But we've just got to score more often when we're getting it inside 50.
All right, well, I think we're going to wrap it there. Thank you, Binman. Thank you, George, for joining me whilst I are out on holidays. But I will be away for the Geelong match, but I will fortunately be home to discuss it, and hopefully we're discussing a great win that sets up the rest of our season. So let's go, Demons.
Can I just say on that game, Andy, that I predict it's going to be a corker. So I reckon both teams will be as fresh. 5-day break from Melbourne, so there's no time to do any additional stuff. We'll be good to go. We'll get a real signal of this if Jacko comes back in, I reckon, because we'll have just about closest to our best 22, and there's a real enmity between these two sides, and that's been building over the last couple of years. And I just get the feeling that the D's are really, really keen to, always keen to win, but if something a bit extra against the Cats. And I reckon they will have thought last year about that prelim. Scott's comments about, the sort of making some comments about the fact they were sick coming into that game. And, I reckon they'll be looking to make a statement. So I haven't looked at as forward to a game of footy for a long, long time. So I can't wait. Go Redleggers.
Well,
I hope you get home from it.
Yeah, enjoy that. Enjoy the trip, and hopefully enjoy the trip home. More importantly, let's go, Demons.
Go Reds.
Come on.